All right, in this study we're going to investigate the most common source of heart beliefs, and that's memories. And most of the time we're helping people and the majority of their problems are going to be found in beliefs learned or interpreted as conclusions about their identity or situation, and they'll be found in memories. So we'll therefore examine how these beliefs may be deposited in the heart as we go through this study. Now, some people question whether or not even accessing memory in a ministry setting is a valid activity. Well, if I asked most people what John 3:16 says, they would quickly respond, God so loved the world. Well, how do they know this? Obviously, they remember it. How to find your way home, how to sit on a chair, how to speak, how to do anything at all is based on learning and remembering. Therefore, memory is related to every single action that we perform, including even breathing. So some people put up questions such as, why do we have to look back? Now, they quote the Apostle Paul, who urges us to not forget the things, or he urges us to forget the things which are behind. And in the following passage we're about to read, in its preceding verses, you'll see that he's not talking about ignoring life-shaping memories. He is in fact talking about forgetting his achievements as a Pharisee, which he now counts as rubbish. And we see this in Philippians 3:13. He says, Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead, I press forward for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. So he's working hard to cooperate with God in the gospel. Now, others comment that you shouldn't spend your whole life looking into the past, and I agree that we should be moving on and working for the gospel, but we also need to set aside specific times where we deliberately deal with issues from our past. I recently heard a friend of mine, David Giles, using a comparison between a rowing boat and a canoe or a kayak race. And in a rowing boat, you're moving forward, but you're looking back all the time, whereas in a canoe or a kayak, you're looking at where you're going and you're moving forward. On occasions, however, even in a kayak, it's good to look back to see if anything or anyone from behind needs to be considered and dealt with, or you may suddenly be overtaken by something that you can't see. So checking what's going on behind out of sight might affect the outcome, or not checking something that's going on behind out of sight might affect the outcome of your race. So in terms of negative heart beliefs and emotions, it's actually a critical part of the healing process to look back. And the most important memory is the initial memory, where the belief is taken in. It's the place with the most detail for accurately examining and identifying the conclusion and the circumstances, qualifying the circumstances of why you came to the conclusion, and then the consequent belief from the circumstances that you've now taken to heart. So it's good to note that memory does not simply relate to the past, it also has implications for the future. For example, if someone has had an event where they were perhaps publicly embarrassed, they would now be on the lookout for potential places or situations where this could happen again. And this will then be a source of low-grade anxiety and will often be present in places such as gatherings with other people. The long-term effects of this will have an outworking in the physical body because we know it as being the end of the line for this subsurface thought. Now, the scientists tell us that there's a small almond-shaped section of nervous tissue in the brain named the amygdala, and it's responsible for memory and emotions. It's considered also by some to be what's known as the fear center. So when something significant such as embarrassment occurs, the amygdala is activated, and its response could be something such as, that wasn't good, I better make a good memory of that so that I can make sure that it doesn't happen again. Now, from the initial event, memory then projects the new belief about possible repeat situations out into the future to try to prevent a repeat occurrence. So virtually all fears or responses to particular stresses have their beginnings in a memory in the past of some kind, and now fear is the expectation of a negative outcome of some sort in the future. So maybe the possible exception to this may be a fear that's passed through the generation line or something of that nature. All right, let's talk about critical events. So the first time that we do anything is a significant moment in terms of encoding information about how we perceive that particular activity. So our early impressions of how we perform in areas such as the school environment, for example, are a common place of memory where people often end up when we get into a session, or how our parents and teachers regarded and assessed our efforts will affect the way in which we view our person and ability to perform and meet requirements. We could perhaps be compared to a sibling who's academically, well, to begin with, interested, but they may also be gifted in academic things and come away with some kind of inferiority belief or low self-image. Now, typically, these would end up unconscious inner thoughts, heart beliefs such as, I'm not as good as others, I'm dumb, a loser, I'm useless, I'm not like other people, I'm a failure. These sorts of beliefs end up heart beliefs. Now, this certainly has an impact when we're deciding about our identity as a child, and that becomes our default position until God heals it. And remember, we said this is the time that our brain is plastic. In other words, it's shapeable and it's impressionable. Now, later in life, we will use those beliefs to interpret other critical first-time events, say, for example, sexuality. Now, usually, again, if that first-time experience is not positive, they'll see those activities through the filter of their existing beliefs, so existing self-image beliefs in particular, having already perhaps learned that they're inferior or can't perform as others can. They'll use these pre-existing beliefs to reach a conclusion about whether or not the activity is a positive and reinforcing one, or yet another place for anxiety. So as a side note, I think in much the same way as parents and teachers should remove pressure and help a child to see their academic endeavours in a positive light, I think the church should help newlyweds with realistic expectations to help them qualify their performance in the learning process of areas such as sexuality and relationships. And this would hold true, of course, for other significant first-time events such as speaking or sharing in church or something like that. All right, now let's look at the significance of traumas and episodes. First, we'll look at traumatic episodes. A number of years ago, we were conducting our healing school, and a Chinese lady came into the session with her husband. Now, all the way through the teaching, she would cough every few seconds. She wasn't deliberately being disruptive. She was just unable to prevent it. So she went through over and over all through the evening. The next day, she made an appointment to be on the ministry list to receive some help. And as we interviewed her, it came to light that she'd been in an accident that was crushing her chest, and this was the beginning point for her coughing and her lung problem. Now, she's a very brave lady, and she connected with the fear belief that she'd taken in the trauma, which was something, as I recall, like, I'm going to die. That was what she believed in the traumatic moment, which, of course, is a fear-filled belief. Now, as she remembered the event and connected with the belief and feeling, we invited the Lord to bring His truth. Now, in this particular instance, because she was connected with the event, a spirit of fear of death was exposed, and it manifested and then came out. Now, at the same time, God communicated to her regarding this trauma belief that she was going to die. She was free, and she sat quietly throughout the day and finally testified to her healing in the evening service without any sign of coughing. In fact, she was healed and freed from some other problems as well, and as a result, she was so pleased with the school that she translated all of the considerable amount of notes into Chinese for use in her own nation. So let me just make a few points and notes here. Firstly, it's unlikely, if we'd just gone straight after the spirit of fear, that we would have had the same success in seeing her set free from it. Identifying and feeling the belief which the spirit rode in on at the point of weakness exposed it and brought it out into the open with nowhere to hide. Dealing with the belief closed the emotional breach that gave it place. So we're not hunting for demons, even in traumatic situations where we're looking for the beliefs encoded, because that's where the problem really lies. If there's some evidence of demonic replay or stronghold or amplification, then we can simply tell it to go. And I usually do this while I have the person focus on the beliefs, producing the feelings, and while they're waiting to hear from the Lord. And these things very often happen simultaneously. And so this is the way the Spirit's exposed. The same can be applied to dealing with areas such as even lust problems. Being exposed to pornography, for example, can be a kind of trauma which is deeply encoded in the memories. If there's a lustful spirit there, then having the person think thoughts from the trauma can in some cases cause the demon to be brought to the surface, because you've connected with that which it holds. So now it's manifested, and it's, if the person's willing for it to be cast out, that can be a good time to do it. But let me just reiterate here, don't go looking for demons, but be aware that they may be present, particularly in regards to things like trauma. Practically, in most truth encounters, you'll not even be aware of or give demons a thought, although you are taking away the ground. But we'll cover more on spiritual dynamics in the next unit, not the next study, the next unit, Unit 5. And now another issue is episodes, and which are places where memory comes in. And by episodes, I'm referring to individual events where beliefs were the conclusions arrived at in that critical moment. For example, sexual or physical abuse. They're extremely traumatic in nature. But imagine your parents forget to pick you up from school, and it might be a one-time episode where you concluded that you're not important and you really don't matter. Now, it may not be traumatic, because even though you're feeling hurt because of their omission and seemingly not caring about you, you're actually having a great time with the other kids in the playground. But it's nonetheless an episode, it's an event, it's something that happened. Sexual abuse, to be abused sexually, is a traumatic episode which can affect many areas of the personality. So from the damage and brokenness involved, there often emanates rejection, fear, confusion, degradation, and low self-image. Now, this is a pretty significant area that you'll often work in when you consider the indications in the Western world are that as many as 50% of women have had some form of inappropriate sexual behaviour acted out on them. Now, this could range from being touched by a friend of the family or a relative, right through to penetrative sex with a small child. Having ministered to quite a lot of these victims, I can offer you hope that God will faithfully set you free. I also offer a list of possible beliefs that are commonly present with people who've been offended against in this way. So, for example, you may have inferiority beliefs, which can be, I'm dirty. Well, if everybody else isn't, then you're inferior. I'm unclean. Now I'm not like other people. I'm ruined. I'm a nothing. Or perhaps even I'm a bad person. There can be confusion beliefs, and often many of these are present. Confusion beliefs like, I'm overwhelmed, I won't be able to cope, I don't know or understand what's happening. And then you may have guilt beliefs. Somehow this is my fault. I've done this. I've caused this to happen. At times you'll find situations like children will get attention, value and importance at a neighbour's house, and when they haven't been receiving much at home. And some of this attention and value may eventually include sexual behaviour. Now, the guilt's too much to bear because they know at some level that they wanted to be there. Now, they wanted to be there mostly for the emotional needs that are being met. And on occasions I've even ministered to people who've felt guilty because they've felt physical pleasure somewhere in the act. Now, nerve endings are nerve endings. They don't discriminate between whether an event is appropriate or not. They just report sensations. So if they felt pleasure, and I'm not saying that's common, if they felt pleasure, then it was not their fault either. But this is something that they may need perspective from the Lord on. More often, as I said, abused people would report something like pain. Okay, Fear is another outworking, and this can be in the form of being overwhelmed physically and emotionally and not understanding what is happening. So beliefs such as, I cannot cope, it's too much to bear, I'm trapped, overpowered, there's nobody here to protect me, they may also be present and come from these events. And further, fear from threats from the perpetrator over being harmed if they tell anybody, or even if their parents are a little bit harsh and they're afraid to tell the parents because maybe even it's a relative or something like that, they then expect punishment from the family. So if the abuse continues with subsequent events, usually these later times are interpreted through whatever beliefs are already held from the first or initial episode. And this could be the person believing that it's happening again because they're bad or dirty or naughty, or some other belief that they already hold as being true about themselves. Okay, some of the sad outcomes from sexual abuse are that once a person has concluded at heart level that they're a bad or dirty person, they might even try to be good. After all, they're ruined and spoiled anyway. So the result of this kind of inner dialogue can be a promiscuous lifestyle. Perhaps they've learnt that sexual acts give you favour, love or acceptance from men, or it could be women. So normally the exact opposite of promiscuity is the issue that you'll commonly deal with, and that is sexual dysfunction. So the act of sex by association connects you with all of these fears and feelings of sex as being dirty, the guilt, the defilement, enjoyment then, and participation in the sexual act is no longer an option for you because of these negative feelings. Now, this can be a great barrier to having a wholesome, complete and intimate relationship with your spouse. And sadly, in this age, a high percentage of males have also been abused, so they also carry the same problems. I ministered to a man some time ago who reported that before he and his wife were married, they'd had a very active sex life. Now here, I'm not making any comments on the appropriateness of this sexual behaviour, but what did happen was, after they were married and became Christians, she shut down, and the sex life that they had previously enjoyed ended. Now, once I'd ascertained that she'd been abused as a child, I explained to him that most probably before they were married, she felt as though she was in control and could walk away at any time. After they were married, she would have unconsciously been feeling as though she didn't have a choice anymore. She wasn't in control because now she had to have sex. Possibly she also felt that she was trapped and couldn't get away. These were all unconscious thoughts that she'd learnt in the abusive episode, and they were now heart beliefs from that situation. So unintentionally, her inner beliefs were now being triggered, and her emotional priorities dictated her behaviour, which is a break in the sexual relationship with her husband. So whatever the inner thinking that people hold, God has a greater truth to set you or them free, as the case may be. All right, when we return, we're going to look at how repetitive themes can also become a part of our permanent memory.